welcome to Sustainability Matters, the Anthesis podcast. My name is Chris Peterson, and I'll be your host. In this series, I get to speak with colleagues, thought leaders, and friends on the key sustainability topics of the day. As such, I'm really pleased to be speaking with Paul Crewe on the commercial criticality of sustainability. This is a topic that I love to dig into and really see as fundamental to the maturation of the sustainability space and critical to harnessing the power of business going forward. Paul couldn't be better positioned to speak to this topic for a number of reasons, including the fact that he's an executive director and our chief sustainability officer here at Anthesis, as well as prior to joining us, he had extensive career at Sainsbury, Argos, and others where he led sustainability, energy, engineering, environment, and facilities management. Among other things, he was instrumental in delivering some of the highest returning investments in Sainsbury's 150-year-old history through key sustainability investments and technology programs. Paul, welcome to the podcast.
Good afternoon, Chris, and thank you for the opportunity to talk to you.
Thank you very much for joining. This is great. So let's jump in with what you mean by the commercial criticality of sustainability.
Yeah, so for me, I'm going to make an assumption that everybody understands that the world is changing and climate change impacts are real. And what I want to focus on today is, what does it really mean for businesses? What does it really mean for commercial entities? And I want to draw on some of the experiences that I've had over the past 9 years leading the sustainability agenda in Sainsbury's, and bring to life what it really does mean and has meant for a pretty large organisation that provides most of the food and non-food for residents in the UK. And for me, if I think about a business, there are a number of factors that drive the commercial impact on sustainability. If you think about most businesses, their first cost is either energy or it's people. So if we take people out of the equation for a second, it's very important, and we think about the next highest controllable cost, then energy configures up there alongside water and alongside waste. And so if we can think about areas that can create value to businesses by either reducing costs, which in turn are able to reduce the impact on the sustainability measures that a business has through carbon or through waste or for water, then you can start to have significant bottom line value accretive benefits to the business. And if you think about other drivers, so you have the commercial, physical bottom line drivers, but there's also many other drivers that make a big difference to a business. Now, the consumers, your customers, and your colleagues can have a huge impact on how a business is perceived and how colleagues feel working for an organisation when things are being seen to be done for the right reasons. You have lots of measures out there, CDP, you have TCFD, you have science-based targets, we have UN SDGs. Well, these are all important factors which enable businesses to be measured on performance. And these aren't just about driving bottom line, but it's about perception, which then moves into reputational criticality of sustainability. They're very much intrinsically linked. And from my perspective, working with many organizations since joining Anthesis over the past 18 months, what I've seen is that the reputational aspect is increasing day by day. There are many factors that can actually influence and create a change for a business that have customers that can choose to shop with them if they're a retailer by going and choosing one door versus another door, depending upon the operations that the business is perceived is taking a lead on or driving in their own operations. And we also have media, we have government, and we have people power that makes a huge difference. But where I found an increasingly important factor is I've spent an enormous amount of time talking with institutional investors, shareholders, private equity. And over the years, when businesses were being viewed by those financial institutions, environmental social governance in the past has been a formality and, to a degree, in some instances, a bit of a tick box exercise. But what I'm seeing right here and now, and I've seen over the last 18 months, is that ESG, environmental social governance, is absolutely mainstream, is an extremely serious focus for those investors. And so the type of analysis and questions that those investors are taking and asking are now very important in the decision making, in some instances, where those investors are actually going to place their bets and invest in organizations. And one of the things that, as an example, I used to attend AGMs and investor roadshows in Sainsbury's. And for many years, questions around sustainability were never asked. But in my formative time in Sainsbury's, during those sessions, absolute awareness was there, and questions were being asked both at an AGM level, an annual general meeting level, but also by investors, because they were absolutely getting that the way in which Sainsbury's and other organisations need to prepare for the future, they need to ensure that they are focused on those causes that could have an impedance on the growth, or actually those businesses being sustainable, as in, i.e., being physically able to trade in the future. And if I just give you a couple of examples, if I think around energy, and if I just take the UK alone, this will not be just the UK, this could be probably most continents and countries. The likelihood of energy increasing over the next 3 or 4 years is extremely high. And in the UK, there are some indicators that energy is going to increase by 30 to 40%. Now, as I said earlier, if your highest or second highest controllable cost in the business is energy, that is going to be a big number. And so being smart and being able to take practical examples of providing interventions to protect yourselves from the cost of rising energy, but also reducing energy and creating your own energy is something absolutely that makes a huge difference. So I have experience of deploying very large interventions in organizations that allow those businesses to take control of their energy usage. And so, for example, if I think about energy reduction in the first instance, the best thing to do is reduce your energy before you start thinking about procuring other alternative types. And practical examples of interventions to reduce are not rocket science. They're very simple. So if I take LED lighting, by implementing LED lighting to replace standard fluorescent type fittings and halogen fittings, I have really strong examples of reducing energy immediately by around about 90%. Those are big numbers. And the payback is less than 3 years. So all of a sudden, being able to connect those type of activities with your chief financial officer and those people in your business that are accountable for capital investment, these suddenly start to make real strong sense. Basic monitoring, being able to monitor your energy systems and being able to use really simple, smart technology without having to replace all of your existing operational building management systems can pay dividends. I've had examples where I was able to put a monitoring system that was using all of the existing wiring and monitors and sensors and was able to get payback of below 2 years. And these were all competing with capital in a business that was needed to keep that business going. But it's not just about reducing energy in your own operations. It's also about how can you generate your own power? How can you think laterally? And there's lots of myths and legends that being sustainable needs to cost you the earth. Well, it doesn't. It really, really doesn't. And there are some fantastic examples of technologies that can really make a difference. We've got traditional photovoltaics that go onto roofs that produce power through sunlight. That's great. But there's been new technologies that have been introduced in the last year or 2 years that are highly more efficient than PV panels and can absolutely create heating and hot water through the same tube as producing electricity. And by deploying those, you can actually utilize 50% of the roof space that you would traditionally use for PVs in those environments, in those geographies where the electricity and the incentives of using renewable energy works. Right the way alongside other opportunities in temperate climates to use the earth, going back to traditional Roman methodologies of using the heat in the earth to heat buildings. So we've got some great examples of where we've used deep bore ground source heat pumps. And these are actually pretty sexy bits of equipment where the ground around the property is drilled to a depth of around about 500 meters. And in the UK, that's lower than the tube line in London, which is pretty deep. And when able to capture the heat from the refrigeration systems in the retail store and put it into the ground, it helps the refrigeration systems to become more efficient. But then you can draw that heat out of the ground in the winter, and all of a sudden you've got a renewable circular way of generating heat, which is completely renewable. So these things are all tangible. They pay back fantastically well. They stand alone, and they make a big, significant impact to those businesses that are deploying them. And again, they were able to provide some fantastic sustainable credentials, reductions in carbon, reductions in water, but it can also be extremely commercially viable and help the business to do things that they could no longer continue to do if those rising costs of energy continued.
And Paul, I think that's great. It's a really interesting example there. And I know I'm speaking with a number of peers and colleagues and friends in the space, right? Those types of examples are things people get excited about, see lots of opportunity, but that commercial value that you were just talking about, maybe could you unpack that a little bit in terms of how did you take those ideas and translate them into some clear benefits and address some of the challenges and opportunities in getting those approved within Sainsbury or others?
Yeah, absolutely. That is probably the key aspect. Being able to translate opportunities in a language that is understood by the decision makers in the business are absolutely critical. I had the opportunity to work for the chief financial officer in Sainsbury's, which was very interesting because it really made me think how to land the right messages with the individual and the board that he sat on that made those decisions. And what I found was vital was having the right data. Yeah, everybody talks about data as being essential. It's not essential, it's absolutely critical. And what that enabled me to do was to have fact. Having the data around the operations, having data around the technologies I wanted to deploy, but translating the story not just into an Excel spreadsheet that was fantastic for the accountants in the business. It was being able to translate that into a really compelling story that was simply and clearly understood by the whole of the decision makers that weren't necessarily always accountants in the business, clearly and simply. And so I spent my life over the last from today going backwards for the last 9-10 years, as being a storyteller, but a storyteller of facts in a very simple manner. And once you're able to really identify and clearly share what that means to the business, both from a financial perspective, first and foremost, but also what that could mean for the community that building was situated in, the colleagues in that building, the colleagues in the business, and the customers, all of a sudden you've got a methodology to connect all of the dots together. And when you connect all of those dots together, I was able to really land compelling rationales as to why we should invest. Now, what I found from personal experience, it was great, and I got immediate traction, and I was able to spend literally hundreds of millions of pounds over quite a short period of time. But all of a sudden, other draws on capital in the business were required. The business still needed to maintain its status quo. It was a retailer. It still needed to replace its vehicle fleets. It still needed to replace its digital infrastructure. It still needed to replace and refit and refurb its offices and its stores and its logistics depots. So all of a sudden, even though the return on investments were fantastic and they stood on their own ground, I was still competing in an environment where capital was limited. So I had to think laterally, and this is where I think a huge difference was made. Seeking alternative methodologies of financial funding of the rollout of those technologies made a huge difference. And examples were exploring how to work with banks to generate green bonds. So having a green bond that enabled us to accelerate a significant number of those technologies. In this instance, I raised a green bond for £200 million and was very successful. And that enabled a significant rollout of various technologies from refrigeration through to energy generation. But also thought even more laterally, and there are great opportunities to create finance mechanisms through finance lease deals. So this is where a technology can be deployed at scale across a business. And in this example, I deployed LED lighting across the whole of the Sainsbury's estate, over 120,000 light fittings. And that enabled the finance of the implementation and the light fittings themselves to be funded by a third party. And that amount was then able to be paid back through the savings in the energy that were made by the reduction of energy once those light fittings went in over a period of time, which was very good for Sainsbury's because it allowed an acceleration of investment that would have taken probably 5 or 10 years based upon the amount of capital that was available. And the third opportunity is through an energy performance contract, whereby you can enter into a contract for a third party, somebody like Anthesis, to come in and deploy a significant amount of technology, encompassing all that I've just spoken about, and then you then pay back the capital through a share in the savings that are made by the deployment of the technology. Those are all very successful. There's no hypothesis in what I've just shared. They're real examples of being able to really scale up the investment in a way that would probably take many, many years utilizing your own capital. Of course, we work today with many clients that have capital available. And because I shared previously, the return on investments of these types of technology interventions are extremely good. In some instances, as I shared earlier, they are so high that they probably exceed quite often the core return on investment of the business that those technologies are deployed into.
Amazing. And so, Paul, I'm sold. I'm bought in. It sounds great. I also know kind of, the challenges in the details, right? And so maybe digging a little bit into the sausage making part of this, having you go through that, I'm sure others listening in are saying, well, yeah, I would love to have great data to, have the facts that I could then build a story around. I'd love to pursue alternative financing. Can you give any insights from your experience at Sainsbury or others that stand out for here's how you get that ball rolling, how you get that level of engagement, how you collect that basic monitoring and data, et cetera, within that?
Yeah, I mean, every business is different. But for me, you have to go back to absolute basics. It's not about having phenomenally swishy data capture systems. It's about using what you've currently got and making sure that the operations that are in your business are held account for those key metrics and those key measures. And if I just take very simply energy, waste, and water, and those three ultimately, regardless of which business you're operating within, will be pretty high in the stakes where it comes to your controllable costs that will impact your bottom line. And if you make it important enough that your board will start to ask questions and will really start to want to understand the baseline and the benchmark of your business, it will happen. Unequivocally, it will happen. And you can become smarter and you can start to use systems and become even more refined and optimized. But really taking and having a clear understanding of your business operations at every level in those three distinct areas will make a very significant difference. And quite often that it can be a challenge. And in some instances, I know that as a business we go in and we help and we give people advice and guidance. In some instances, we'll actually do the activities for them. But ultimately, even if we do that, it's really important for the business to understand. And going back to the storytelling I said earlier, it's very difficult to unknow something once you know it. And so being smart at storytelling and raising the awareness of the operational costs in your business, and also the facts around the climate change measures that fit around it, whether that be carbon or physical water usage, or the amount of diesel that's being used, or the amount of miles that are being used for transport. Once you understand and you have that data, it truly does work. But the one thing that I'm cognizant of, and I've learned from my mistakes, is that I was most successful when producing those papers and those business cases to the investment board was not to come at it from a sustainability angle, but to come at it from absolutely doing fantastic business. So fantastic business was the language that I was able to utilize, and then being able to share the upside benefits of the impact of introducing those types of technologies in the business could have on climate change and could have on the social aspects of those businesses and for their customers, for their communities. And that's where I believe the focus is best placed. It doesn't work in every organization, but from my own personal experience, where I've been the most successful, and as I said, or as you kindly introduced, the highest returning investments ever made in Sainsbury's 150-year-old history were absolutely through sustainability activities and interventions along the lines I've just shared. And so hopefully that dispels myths and legends that sustainability costs you the earth, when in fact it doesn't. It can actually support the earth.
Right. Well, Paul, that feels like a great way to kind of wrap things up with that. I love that, really focusing in on that fantastic business piece. As you said, being good for the earth and into costs here, and that translating to kind of business language. So are there any final thoughts from your side, recommendations, next steps, kind of immediate actions that you suggest to the listeners how to get started on this path? Or
keeping it very simple. Absolutely. Really simple. Know your data, create your compelling story, and just go for it. Because once you've got your compelling story, you've got your data, and you start to really explore and understand that those technologies are there, those technologies can be deployed, and they can make a huge difference, and they can support the businesses that you have. And that's great for not only the businesses themselves, but the communities, the consumers, and most importantly, for your colleagues and the colleagues within your operations and organizations. Because, sustainability, it's such a tangible, palpable feeling, sense of awareness being generated globally, that this can only be good for everybody that's involved in a business that takes this seriously. And if you can tackle this through generating traction through the commercial aspects of doing the right thing and being able to then celebrate and share that with your organizational relationships, it can only be good. So good luck. I wish you well on your journeys. And if there's anything that I can do to support and Anthesis can do to support, please pick up the phone. I'd love to hear from you.
Thank you, Paul. I really enjoyed that. I thought that was great. And thank you for listening. As always, we'd love your feedback and thoughts, including hearing from you on what has worked for you, what you've learned, and what you're trying to figure out within your own organization. Paul himself can be reached at paul.crewe@anthesisgroup.com. That's paul.crewe@anthesisgroup.com. And I'm available via chris.peterson@anthesisgroup.com. Thanks again to Paul for all the insights, and again to you for listening. Have a good one.